All right, hi everybody in English 10-1. It's Ms. Picard here, and I'm doing a bonus video on how to plan out and revise and upgrade your thesis statements for a critical essay using a chemical reaction diagram. So I know this sounds incredibly weird. What am I doing in English class? But I wanted to share with you one strategy that I find incredibly useful for planning my focus statements. I personally find it hard to map out my thesis idea at the beginning of my writing process, but I've also found writing through high school and writing through university that if I don't have that focus kind of right in front of me, written at the top of my paper or on a sticky right in front of me on the wall, if I don't have that guiding me, I get distracted like really quickly, and it happens very easily for me. So one thing I would encourage you to do is to try the strategy out. You don't have to like it. You can try something else, but this is one way that I found useful for showing change in a character and also in a community of characters sometimes, and also mapping out how one character might differ from another. And we're going to talk about that with some parallel and some correlative, some connected diagrams about process. Okay, so I'm inside of the Romeo and Juliet course pack on page 18, and you can see there's kind of two images after you've done your basic brainstorming about the topic. And the one I'm going to use today is the topic of the role of courage. Okay, after you've done some basic brainstorming about the topic, then you want to think about how to actually link logically an argument together. Now, I'm just going to write down in the side panels here comments example sentences for each of these steps so that you can kind of follow along at home if you really want the extra help. Remember, this video is optional, so if you're rocking these thesis statements already, I'd invite you just to go right now into your own paper and do some great work. This is just for people who want that little bit of extra help or a new way to look at doing this planning. So again, my topic for my example is going to be the role of courage. Okay, notice how I'm putting that right up top in front, and I'll even put it in people language. Role of courage in a person's life. That's a universal in scope way of thinking about that topic. That for many people, courage will be a certain thing, right? Remember that in your introductions, you don't have to say always. Like, in fact, it's really hard to prove always. In science, it only takes one black swan to disprove the theory that all swans are white, right? And so that idea of like having a theory or an argument that's universal in its absolute argument, like always or never, I actually tell students to avoid always and never. I'm going to write that down as a piece of advice. Avoid always and never statements if you can. Opt instead for often in life or sometimes when a person, ... or some people, right? It don't have to be all people, but some people or communities might experience a particular trend. Look for trends, not absolutes, because trends you can talk about and convincingly prove. Absolutes are very difficult to prove because it only takes one example of an exception to suddenly make your argument seem like it's maybe not as convincing. Okay, that's just my general tidbit about language and the topic. Now, you would hopefully have brainstormed synonyms. So for me, I'm going to say courage equals, here's a big list: determination, bravery, standing up, right? Overcoming your doubts, taking a firm position, looking after those who are vulnerable. Maybe I think that's courageous. Being independent under pressure. There's a lot of different things I could put there for courage. That's my example brainstorm. And remember, I'm looking for examples from the play to link in as well. And so for that part, my examples from the play might be Romeo and Juliet's courage in defying their families, right? The priest's courage helping them in secret. I could talk about him as a person who's courageous. I could say dangerous courage, too hot, acting too quickly. And by hot, I better fix that up and say too hot-headed. So you know what I mean there. Acting too quickly. Maybe I'm thinking there of Tybalt, right? He gets right into a fight. So there's courage, but there's also acting hastily. And I think that that's something that Shakespeare in lots of his plays is very cautious about. So those are examples that would maybe match with some of my ideas here. What about overcoming doubts? Courage to overcome doubts. Maybe Juliet courageously working out the logic, right, of committing to Romeo. Like, what's in a name? Commitment to Romeo. Apologies for the horrible typo there. My dictionary doesn't even recognize commitment. I'm going to leave it commitment. There we go. Ish. No, mitsmem. There you go. Okay. So I'm going to comment with that. Juliet courageously has to think through it and tells Romeo to pause and like, don't swear by yourself and let me think about what it means, what's in a name. She actually takes the time to pause and think it through. So you're going to write your focus idea. Okay, well, so listen to the directions here. If you want to have a good, solid process kind of idea, then you're going to need a because. You might think that courage is good, but that's pretty boring and doesn't tell me why. So you might say courage is beneficial, even better word, right? Courage is beneficial because what does it do? Let's say that it helps a person develop independence and integrity. That fits Romeo, who's independent of his family, and it fits Juliet, who has the integrity to pause and be like, I think we should think about why our relationship's working and what it should be like, if it should be this hot and cold thing, or if it should be, I'm committed to the real person you are, Romeo. So courage is beneficial because it helps a person develop independence and integrity. I'm going to write that down as my idea, as my because idea. Okay, let's start with that. So I added a because and a reason. Now that's this first step. A is like courage, right? It leads to C, which is independence and integrity, because, right, of B. Now the because isn't great, right? So I'm going to write down here A equals having courage, C equals having independence, but the process, B, isn't clear yet. And so it's a help to add because, but it doesn't totally outline the conditions yet, right? So to upgrade that idea, if I want to have a conditions and talk about why that blue arrow does stuff, you might want to think about adding this word when. And if you think about like a chemical reaction, A might be, you know, let's just use H2O. A might be water, okay? A is going to become, the liquid A is going to become the steam C when I add something in the between, right? So that B, what has to happen for water to evaporate? There's got to be heat or sunshine, something to actually make that liquid become gas. So that A of water has to become C, and it happens through a process where something's added in that B phase. My first sentence didn't have the what's added. My next sentence is going to talk about that orange stuff there, the addition of a catalyst or of something that changes A into that final C. Okay, so if you're thinking in chemistry terms, we're talking about catalysts, this in-between process, something that's in the environment or something that happens in a person's head, right? In their thinking, in their decision-making, that shifts their behavior into that new C thing. So let's take a look at our when. So right now I've said so far, courage is beneficial because it helps you become independent, right? Okay, so let's set an environmental condition. Let's set that little B process. What is it that really helps Romeo become independent? Is he just suddenly independent? What happens in the middle there when he's going up and dancing with Juliet, or when he's climbing up that balcony? Both of those things, just thinking about those scenes and the kinds of language he uses and how people react. Like, remember, Tybalt doesn't want Romeo to go dance with Juliet. He like wants to get involved. And the nurse is like, interrupts the two lovers on the balcony. And so it's kind of dangerous, right? Here's what I'm going to say. My guess is that courage, based on the play, courage develops in developed courage is beneficial because it develops a person's independence when they are willing to take risks, right? To change their habits or environment. And now environment there is actually the family environment, right? Their environment or family environment. I don't really like that. Let's just say change their habits of mind. Let's do that. Because habits of mind might be, I'm going to listen to my family. I'm not saying that's bad. That's actually a wonderful thing to have a family where they're supportive of one another, right? But for Juliet's case, specifically her, right, she is going to get married off by her parents. Her parents don't want to listen to her and her professed love for Romeo or her desire to be making those decisions herself. At the beginning of the story, she's just like, yeah, whatever, it's an honor I never thought of. I'll do what you say, sure. But she slowly learns to be independent and question and make choices on her own. And so Shakespeare, at least in this play, shows that's a good thing to an extent for her. So we're going to say courage is beneficial to people like Juliet because it develops a person's independence when they're willing to take risks to change their habits of mind. Okay, she takes a risk in investing in Romeo. She takes a risk by getting married to him. And there's some benefit there because she really loves him, and they have a very short season together where they're fully in, fully committed, fully happy. So I'm going to put that in as my condition. Now, I might have chosen other whens, right? I might have said courage is beneficial when, let's think of Romeo. Courage is beneficial to a person's independence when it allows them to stand up to their friends. Right? Romeo actually tells Mercutio and Tybalt to calm down. He becomes more mature. He was the guy who was at first all about hot and cold love, right? Oh, I'm either loving Rosalind or I think she's, it's the worst thing ever. It's the best thing ever to love her. He was very extreme in that very first scene in the play where he appears. He learns to not blow hot and cold. He learns to be more moderate, to be careful, to reach out in peace to Tybalt. It doesn't work, but he learns that. And if Tybalt had been more like Romeo, maybe there would have been a détente. Maybe there would have been this calming down between the families. So there's other whens. There's other things I could have said there about how courage is beneficial. It gives you independence when you take risks, when you learn to be moderate, when, when it's not counteracted by your family. That's an interesting one, right? Because I could put a little orange catalyst in there that's trying to mess things up. So it could talk about how Juliet's mom tries to marry her to Paris, how Tybalt, insists on the fight. So that's how I use chemical reaction diagrams. I'm not going to go into the really complicated version where I set up two reactions in parallel, but there are ways to extend this little strategy into your grade 12 writing, into university writing, where you really can examine the cultural impacts, the relationships and family groupings in text. You can really talk about a lot of complex human things by thinking about the way that they behave in relationship, which is really all that a chemical reaction diagram or equation tells us, right? It tells us a relationship story. And so if you liked this relationship story, then I have more strategy videos that you can check out, and you can see me in tutorial office hours, and I'll give you some more tips and tricks. The final one that I'll just offer out to the universe is if you don't like the picture part of this, but you like the idea of lacing together logic in a visible chain, then one way you might construct that chain is to use transition words to map out your thinking. Now, when I do this, I put these ones into a box like this, and I work my way around the box. So I will say, when something happens, comma, people tend to behave in a certain way because of this reason. However, if they decide to act differently, then. So it's a little map around that box that will help you to establish a thesis idea. It's not required, but it might look something like this. When people take healthy risks, remember I talked about risks with Juliet? When people take healthy risks, they tend to be able to develop their courage and independence because healthy risks make us question our habits of mind and outside sources of pressure, like adults who you'd expect to know how to fix the problems, right? Okay, however, if people act too hastily in risky ways, they may end up isolated, and their courage may lead them into dangerous conflicts. Sound like Tybalt, perhaps, or Romeo at times, or Mercutio at times, right? However, if people act too hastily and in risky ways, they might end up isolated, which can lead them then, which may then, I'll put the then in there for you, which may then lead them into dangerous conflicts. Now, you'll notice when I was fluidly writing just to talk to you, I didn't actually use all those transition words, right? I didn't stick rigidly to this formula so that it didn't sound natural. I actually removed the ones I didn't need, but it was still an if-then statement. It was still that kind of a sentence put together. This is just a really good reminder to you that although these are tools, ultimately your goal is to convince me of your argument and your opinion. So you don't want to sound rigid like you yourself are only a formula. You want to still have voice and edit your sentences and play around with this kind of language so that your points sound like you. You can't come into every essay and always sound the same, because then you're not actually processing the topic and thinking through what your opinion is. This is the biggest piece of advice I can give you, because people want to come into exams and into, later coursework kind of with a set way of doing things. And I understand it from the standpoint of nerves and from the standpoint of having a backup plan. But remember that this is kind of your backup plan. It's like the framework. It's the framing of the building or the scaffolding. It's not the finished product. So I'd encourage you more and more, as you play around with these kind of strategies, just keep in mind that you still want to retain your voice as a writer. You want to use good language, good words, engaging verbs, and make it sound like you. You don't have to rigidly follow this formula to get a good mark. In fact, that excellent level is supposed to sound fluent and fluid, like it sounds natural. So you want to be playing around with these to see what fits you and your writing style. Okay, I hope that you found that video useful. That's really where I'm going to cap it today for thesis statements in that example. There's lots of other ways to write thesis statements. And if you go further down in the booklet, I've helped too with some examples of topic sentences. But I'm going to leave that to you to explore independently. If you have any questions, as always, please by all means email me. And you're welcome to show up to our Google Meets, and I'll have tutorial office hours to work with you one-on-one on how you're wording your work. Okay? Thank you for your attention. Have a lovely week. Bye.